Welcome to the C-Suite Mentor, the place where you will learn the tools, strategies, and mindset to scale your business sustainably and build a lasting legacy. I'm your host, Theresa Cantley. As a fellow CEO, I understand what it takes to scale a business to 7 and multiple 8 figures. It's not necessarily what you might think. It requires a complete shift in how you think, strategize, and execute key actions in your business. My mission is to help CEOs step back into the driver's seat of their business by optimizing their operations, empowering their team, and staying in total alignment with their big vision. So, are you ready to exchange everything that hasn't worked for strategies that will? You're in the right place, so let's go.
Oh man.
Okay, now we're gonna truly really start our conversation. So we have some good stuff for the show and not for out off the show, because we got to share this because it's gonna be amazing. And this is gonna be, I have been super excited for this conversation since we talked last week. So I just wanted to say, first and foremost, welcome to the show, Taryell. Everybody, this is Taryell Simmons. Taryell has, every time I talk to Taryell, it is like having a conversation with a friend who I haven't seen in forever. And it is filled with insight and information and visioneering and a lot of laughs. So thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you for having me. It's so weird being on the other side of this mic because I'm usually interviewing people in my podcast. And so like, oh, I'm on the other side now. Like it just
oh my God, that's
try to
so
orientate myself. Like, what is happening here?
That is so funny. And it's funny because whenever I get interviewed on a podcast, I always think the same thing. I'm always like, this is weird for me because I'm always on the other side of the mic too. So I totally get it. So,
Yeah.
So I'd like for you to, because you have 2 things that I want to dig into today.
Yeah.
And number one is the work that you do in your consulting business around DEI and the work that you do to really help others. And DEI is a hot topic right now, just with, what's happening between the government and what's happening with, companies because of it. And so I want to dig into that. And I also want to dig into the podcast that you started, which is Rise Urban Nation and what that's all about. So before we go there, let's find out, who is Taryell Simmons?
Man, I got to think about that myself. Taryell is a young man born in New York, upper state, Rochester, New York, but grew up in Washington, D.C. And I grew up in Washington, D.C. at the time when, Washington, D.C. was the murder capital. And then, my mom is from New York. My dad is Nigerian. So there's a little bit of that immigrant experience and the grittiness of a New York mom that made this wonderful human being. I'm also, a young man that was, a product of the school to prison pipeline. When I was young growing up, that was diagnosed with ADHD. And I don't think my parents fully understand what that meant growing up, but I knew my dad was like, no, we're not going to label him that. We're not going to send him to, all the schools. They try to put you in the slow classroom or whatever that system was that was working. So it took me a long time to understand what ADHD is, and we'll get into that probably in the future once I started learning more about it, when I started looking at neurodiversity work and so forth around DEI initiatives. And I was like, oh, I got that. Oh, you mean I should be having this and I should implement my life like this because I'm not as neurotypical as other folks. And you didn't, when you're growing up, you don't see that as a superpower. So
yeah.
And so that's the early beginnings of Taryell Simmons, so to speak.
Wow. So you grew up in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Wow. And, I have known. I mean, Washington D.C. is one of my favorite places on this planet. My husband
Mhm.
and I mean, we go there all the time. But I know that for a while it was labeled as the murder capital of the world or the
Mhm.
country or whatever, and it's just, and it's so weird that it was, because you go there and you have, I mean, everything about our country, and,
Mhm.
and then that's unfortunately what the city, got the label of, and it's just so weird, you
Yeah,
know?
it's evolved throughout the years, but I remember when a friend one time visited and it's like, "Man, it was so beautiful. I was downtown." And then I knew I made a wrong turn somewhere because I was 1 block away, and I was like, "Where have I this is" like, there was hoods, there was drug dealers, there was like and it looked like a war zone to me, and I was like, "This is 2 blocks away from the White House?"
They've
Uh,
done a lot of rebuilding, though. I
yes,
mean,
they have.
definitely. I remember we were there not that long ago, and it was, I mean, they've really done, they put up a lot of, new housing, and they've cleaned up a lot of areas on, which is awesome, and it's
Mhm.
something I always like to see. So, tell us, just so everybody knows, just in case, because neurodiverse is a new terminology. So, can you just explain in your own words, neurodiverse?
Yeah, so neurodiverse, those are people individuals, we may know them as being ADHD, autistic. I'm trying to think of some other attributes, but individuals who may see the world or think differently, right? And perceive the world differently. And the best way I can kind of explain it is there was this one video I saw one time of a young lady who's neurodiverse, and she was saying, when she was in class one day and the way that she knew she didn't think like the rest of the class is because she sees numbers in color. And so she was seeing the number 9 in red, and when she was explaining to the teacher, "You mean the red one?" And then everybody was looking at her and like, "What do you mean red one?" And nobody else was seeing it red, and then she realized that was the point where she realized like, "Oh, they're not seeing the red one. I'm the only one seeing it, so I am a little bit different from other folks." And usually neurodiverse folks have different wiring,
Hmm.
and there's different spectrums, and so the way they may see the world may not be like neurotypical people, so that's why they might have time blindness, or they can be able to people may be able to see certain things in the dark that normative people can't see, and for a while, the US used to treat this as a medical condition, like something that needed to be fixed, instead of looking at it as this is the way somebody is born and where their neurons and their nervous system and so forth operate. And it doesn't make it bad, it makes it different. And how do we start to really, you know, honor that? Because if you had somebody, if you let's say if you were a night ops in the army and you had somebody who could see in the dark, wouldn't you want that on your team?
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be a gift, and how do you use that? And ever since I've been diving into this work, there's some people who are really analytical thinkers and that could do the job of what 10 people can do in a week, because of their ability just to just analyze data so much differently and quicker than us.
Mm,
And a lot of neurotypical people could be in the workforce, but the workforce isn't set up for neurotypical people. So if I have light sensitivity, these fluorescent lights hurt my head, and I need to have dimmed lights or noise cancellation headphones. Or a lot of workplaces aren't set up for neurotypical people, and so even we look at our own world, like with ADA laws, that didn't come in effect till like the 90s. If you think
yeah.
about one of our own president, I think Roosevelt was disabled. He was in a wheelchair, and he often didn't like to show that side because of the stigma around it during that time, right?
Yeah.
And 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 the ADA laws didn't come into the 90s, and those curve ramps that you see now, when we look at how we make the world for everybody, for one group of set of people, we can make it better for everybody. So now women, pregnant women use the ramp, people with bicycles, delivery people use the ramp, not just people with wheelchairs, but I think this is the beautiful thing that we're starting to explore now in our society when we we take the labels and stigma off of things and look at it from a universal design or holistic way of like how do we include all the many differences that are in our society.
Mm. That goes along with the conversation, what we were talking about the other day, which is looking at ultimately what is our goal,
Hmm.
and then making sure that everyone can be part of different things that would happen when we're ultimately
Hmm.
looking to make that goal a reality.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. So there's this guy that I have become friends with. He has this newsletter called Peripheral Thinking,
Hmm.
and he has dyslexia.
Yeah.
And he talks about, and it just reminded me of this when you were speaking. He talks about, people want to build a box and put people into a box.
Hmm.
People talk about, well, we need to think outside the box. And he said peripheral thinkers, which are a lot of, because dyslexia is neurodivergent. And he said peripheral thinkers, when you learn to think the way that a neurodivergent person speaks, he said, or thinks, he said, you're actually burning the box down.
Hmm.
And he said, and you're just thinking outside.
Hmm.
And as you were talking, and I think being neurodiverse has allowed you to, in the work that you do in your consulting business, surrounding DEI and looking at that, what is the goal we're trying to achieve? What
Hmm.
is that collective goal? Ubuntu. What is that collective goal? And individually, how can we all work towards achieving that collective goal? How can we
Yeah.
all just burn the box down and just
Yeah.
think outside of it? And you're right, like, when we do that, we can remove the labels, we can remove the stigma, we can do the things that really need to be done to make society better, to make the world better.
Yeah. And you just use one of
So
my favorite African proverbs, Mbutu, which is,
mine too.
I am because we are, right? Just to simply plainly put it. And Doc Rivers used that same quote to get the Celtics to I forget which year they went to the championship. And that historic run that they went on, they weren't supposed to beat all of these other great teams that were supposed to be better than them. But he leaned into this thing that he put as the mantra up for that team, Ubuntu, and the team started to play as one, right? As even though they all had individual positions, they played as one, and they did it together in such synergy and uniformity that it allowed for the success of them to move past every single obstacle that came in their way. So I love that
Mm,
you mentioned that.
mm. It's one of my favorite proverbs, philosophy, I mean, and I heard about it from, and I even forget because it was so long ago, but they were talking, oh, it was on a meditation. That's what it was. I was
Wow.
actually listening to a meditation, and that was the meditation practice was surrounding it, and she talked about how they did a study, and it was over in Africa, and this guy had a basket of candy,
Hmm.
and he had a group of kids, and have you ever heard of this?
No, I haven't heard this story.
Yeah, there was a group of kids, and it was in a small village over in Africa, and I don't think she said where he was, but and he said, the small basket of candy, and he said, "I want you to run, and I want you to run towards this tree, and whoever wins will win the entire basket of candy." And I think originally he did this with a group of kids, and it was like in the States. Well, individually, they all ran as fast as they could, and then there was a winner.
Mm-hmm.
And the winner got the basket of candy. And he said when he went over there and he did the same thing, and he said all the kids linked arms,
Hmm.
and they all ran to the tree together.
Wow.
And he asked them, he said, "Why did you do that? Why did you all run together?" And they said, "Because if we all get together, we can all share the candy." get there
Mm,
together. We can all
yeah,
share the candy. And I was like, when I'm listening to this meditation, and I just was like so drawn to it, and then I started like looking it up and seeing, what it was all about, and all kinds of things. And it's just been it's been a part of me ever
yeah,
since.
man, I
So,
love that.
and I think it definitely goes along with, we've just as a society, we've put so many labels. I mean, even as entrepreneurs, we label ourselves as so many different things. And
Man,
then we can't figure out why. And then we label ourselves as different things, but then we also are like, either we think I have to do this myself, I have to prove myself, I have to, I can't ask for help, or, if I do raise my hand, somebody's going to judge me. And all of that, what we just talked about, kind of goes out the window.
yeah, it does.
And all you see are the labels. All you see is the judgment. All you see is the imposter syndrome or the negative beliefs. And we don't see that the collective goal is that if we all come together,
Mhm.
we can achieve so much more.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and I've been leaning into that a little bit more because I was speaking to I interviewed one of older young woman on the podcast who actually does healing and does reflexology, and she had went to Africa to kind of study what they do in the bush, and she came back to the States, and then what she learned was, because she learned a little bit about Ubuntu there too as well, is that connectivity and just community is our superpower, right?
mm,
And if we were to lean into community and really be in community, that's where all the magic happens, right? And if you think about just in our overall society in the US, there used to be, I think, to my own personal opinion is that we used to have pockets of community, right? And throughout the years, as social media started to take over and corporations, like, community kind of took on a different meaning. But back in the day when me and you grew up, like, the community knew everybody.
oh yeah,
Your parents knew the neighbors across the way. You did something that they smack you upside the head, right? We used to play outside all day, drink from the water hose. "Oh, can I use
oh
your water
yeah,
hose?" Or the neighbor would have snacks. That parent is taking care of all the kids on the block if they playing over that house, right?
yep, yep. No, absolutely. And you were outside until it started getting dark. And if somebody's house had all the kids at it, like, you had hot dogs that night, because the
Mhm,
parents were like, everybody's just going to eat here. It
mhm.
reminds me, oh my gosh, I'm going to date myself. Do you remember back in the 80s? I'm going to so date myself. Do you remember back in the 80s, and this was my favorite show,
Uh-huh.
227?
Yeah, I remember 227 with the stoop
Talk
and
about
everything, yeah.
community, like, the lady sticking her head out the window, and she, like, knew everybody's business,
Uh-huh.
and it was like, but those, if you think about it, honestly, it was like those times were like happier times,
Yeah,
because you're right, and we talked about this the other day, and I was actually gonna ask you about it, is, how community is the superpower.
yeah. Community is a superpower because if you look at how those communities were set up back in the day, they were very self-sustaining. Everything that you needed or ever wanted was in community. I rem I remember, you know, auntie, uncles, cousins, whatever, they used to go. My dad, for instance, he used to, because he's from the Nigerian community, they used to go to this farm, and they used to go to a farm way yonder, and go with his friends, and then they go buy a cow, and they split the cow up, I don't know, 15 different ways, and everybody had a freezer, right? And they came back. You would go, my aunts and them, there's a friend that was down the way, that used to make this homemade hair product, but they would drive over there, get the homemade hair product, and bring it back. There was a lot of bartering and so forth in community. And then, if I want to talk about in history for the black community, there was communities like Tulsa, right?
Mm.
Like Greenwood. And these were thriving communities that were built by black Americans, and they had their own banks, they had their own hospitals, they had their own everything, and they were thriving. And these towns, sadly, were bombed and burned down due to a lot of different things, from racism to greed to corporate structures to be the white supremacy culture, you name it. And that's what I mean when I say communities are superpower, right? The coming
Mm.
together of folks, just to have something special that, allows that community to thrive.
Yeah. In order for a community to thrive, you have to have connection.
Mhm,
You have to have unity. You
mhm,
have to have diversity. You can't a community cannot thrive and exist when you don't have those things. I
mhm,
mean, I've seen it firsthand in I grew up in Pennsylvania in what they called coal country because there were coal
mhm,
mines. And, I saw when certain businesses shut down or when there was segregation in the community,
mhm,
it just breeded so much hate and toxicity that the community itself could not thrive. In
mhm,
fact, it went backwards. Businesses were impacted and families were impacted.
mhm.
And so in order for people to thrive, the community has to thrive.
Yeah.
And it's you gotta have that connection. And if someone you gotta have that connection. You have to have diverse ideas and diverse backgrounds. And because if everybody's the same,
Mhm.
nothing changes.
Yeah, gonna have the same results. And this is true for entrepreneurship too, right? Like, when you have diverse minds creating a product or service or thing, it only improves that product or that service to make it better so that you can increase revenue, you can increase your clients. And there's a lot of data around this. McKinsey does a lot of data around this that shows that really diverse companies that lean into that diversities
Yep.
are like 80% more profitable, more agile, have better outcomes, products, services, leadership is more dynamic to be able to shift with changes that you need to change to be a thriving company. And all this data is out there that's true, that shows that this is true, but yet we stick to an old capitalistic model, like, all right, if I can't make the most out of this, let me go buy this other company up and either dissolve it or take the pieces I like out of it, when you
It's
could actually.
predatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's predatory. And
Right.
really, I mean, that's part of what has created a lot of the downfall.
Mhm,
And speaking of which, with things that have happened recently, whether, you know, government, the economy, the way that businesses are, the philosophy that businesses have, I know your work as a consultant is centered around DEI and awareness and,
mhm.
helping businesses. So how has that impacted you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So let me give the backstory how I fell into this work, right? Because I started off doing workforce development consulting because I used to do all these workforce development programs back when I was working for an organization called the San Diego Workforce Partnership. But through that, I got to do all of these different programs to get, you know, at-risk youth to work, refugees, and so forth, and into good middle class, middle wage type of jobs. And through that, I mean, we wasn't calling it DEI back then, but I had to learn about the community and what, like, how does community interact to get resources and learn about these different and so that led me into 1 year, a little company called Google and Techstars that reached out to me because they were doing this startup weekend, right? And they were doing a DEI initiative to get more black and brown people to the startup space. And I was like, well, I don't know nothing about DEI, or I don't know anything about startup and all that stuff. And they was like, you know a lot more than you think, right? Because somebody had referred me, and then they tell me, like, then they broke it down to me what they were trying to do. I was like, oh, okay, I can help you do that.
Yeah.
Because the terms were new to me, right?
Well,
And
and they also probably overcomplicated it, but
yeah. And then so I helped them out with this project, and then they invited me to participate in the startup weekend event. And at that time, I was like, okay. I eventually participated, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I should, because I don't have a company and I've never done entrepreneurship. And then they reminded me again, yeah, you have. It's just you've been more of an entrepreneur because you've built things in other companies.
mhm, mhm.
And then I started learning all the top the things like lean startup and all of these different things. And we got to the point where I was like, "Oh, I know all these things, but we call this something different." But,
Yeah.
to make a long story long or shorter, uh, that's how I got the start into DEI. And this is when companies were starting to lean more into it, because they realized, to make their program better and to get more new innovative ideas, just like the startup weekend, that they needed some more diversity. They not needed only just diversity of people, they needed diversity of thought. And when I participated in that startup week, like, the most diverse team that won that competition was my team. And it had a diversity of thought, diversity range of people, like,
Wow.
and individuals. Like, we were all from different backgrounds, sex, education, and class. And we came out with we argued sometimes over the reference point of the product that we were trying to create. But once we got to how to communicate that in a way that valued and centered the humanity of the other person, we got to this product that was just amazing.
Yeah. Well, hey, friction, sometimes you need that friction in order for growth to come out of it or for an idea to come out of it.
Hmm.
So yeah, so the fact that you argued, not bad. Plus also when you have different backgrounds and different it takes a little bit until everybody gets that synergy because everybody's going to have different ideas and different, suggestions and stuff. But friction isn't always a bad thing.
No, it
So
isn't. And I think in
ego
this
makes
new
it bad.
there you go. And in this new climate, we're moving away from valuing that diversity of thoughts and opinions, right? Because I think sometimes when certain people lean into the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it when it as soon as it creates a little bit of discomfort, it makes people want to pull back. But I encourage people to lean in, because it's you get what you put into it. You get out what you put into it. It's like when you go to the gym, right?
Sure.
It When you're exercising a muscle for the first time, where does the growth happen? Does it happen when you say, "Oh, I feel a little resistance. I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna put this down"? No, it doesn't happen there. It happens after you pull that muscle, and then you strain it a little bit. You let it heal, and then that's when you gain the muscle. You gain that strength and that resilience to now be a little bit stronger and more resilient, and be better. And I think that's where we've hit in this new era. Some people were too uncomfortable, and they didn't lean into the discomfort, and it's causing them to pull back just a little bit.
What do you think makes them like why do you and I never understood this and I still don't understand it. But what do you think makes them uncomfortable? Where do you think that discomfort comes from?
I mean, everybody has it to a certain degree. It's that little lizard brain in there that keeps us safe, that in the
Mm.
back. But if we can quiet that little lizard brain down and get to the frontal cortex of our brain, that makes all the executive decisions, that says, okay, I'm not in danger. I'm actually safe. I'm just uncomfortable because I'm in an unknown territory that that is not it's unknown to me, and I need to figure this out, right? And that
Mm.
that figuring out phase of the unknown is the uncomfort, and that's where we need to be, and that's where the beauty could happen. And we can do that. We could do tough things well, but how do we set a container that allows us to recognize everybody's humanity with civility when we do this. I like Renee Brown because Renee Brown. We used to talk about safe spaces, but I was like, safe for who? I like brave spaces, and Brene Brown does such a good job of talking about, just entering those brave spaces so that we can do hard things well.
Well, and to enter into those, first of all, to create a brave space and to enter into it, she talks heavily about you have to be willing to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And courage can only come from vulnerable. And facing those fears or facing the unknown. And the way that, because she said, as she says a lot, you have that shame of not being smart enough, of being different, of
Mm-hmm.
you know being like kicked out of the group, or being whatever, which we see that a lot in workplaces right now, being
Mm-hmm.
shamed for having an opinion, a different opinion, or having a different thought. And
Yeah.
she talks about the way through it is to build courage, and the way to build courage is to be vulnerable. It's
Yeah.
vulnerability.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of times when companies and organizations try to do DEI work, they fail to create a space where we could just have simple dialogue and conversation to create care for each other, right? And what that looks like for the group. And then also for people to be able to do the work themselves. So when you do the work on you, you can show up differently, and then people can say, hey, something about Theresa is different, you know, and then that makes a person get more curious. Now I want to do whatever she's doing. She's doing DIY. I want to do what she's doing because she's she's a better version of herself, and I could just see it. And it's just showing up in the way that she's caring for folks, holding space for folks, communicating with folks, and inviting others in to be curious about them. I often say this: to do this work, and they're probably gonna come for me in the comments for this one. I know the US is based on the culture of the golden rule. Do you know what the golden rule is?
Mm-hmm.
What's the golden rule? Tell the people what the golden rule is.
Okay.
I'll give it to you.
You put me on the spot.
It's no worries, no worries. It's treat others the way you want to be treated, right? In
Okay.
most simplest
Yes.
terms, right?
Yes.
But I say to do this work, we have to abide by the platinum rule, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. And to do that, you have to get curious about people and what makes them tick, what's important to them, how do they think, and so forth. And doesn't mean you have to disagree with everything. You can agree to disagree, but at least you have an understanding of where they coming from. Why I might like okra in my gumbo and why it's important to me. You may not like okra in your gumbo, but I like it, and we could both have gumbo, and I can respect you liking gumbo without okra. But you can also respect me having my gumbo with okra, right? And there's a funny I just realized I gave the analogy, and I need to give you the backstory behind that analogy.
With the okra and the gumbo?
Yeah. So
I just thought it was just because you like okra, you like Southern food.
I do.
Real.
So listen, I'm a foodie through and through at the heart. And another thing I used to do when I talk to people about DI work, especially in organizations, I say, hey, it's like making gumbo. How many of y'all like gumbo? And then usually there's a group of people who know what gumbo is. I like, and how do you make it? They're like, oh well, you put sausage, you put peppers, and then somebody would say the Holy Trinity. Oh, it's the root. And I was like, yeah, there's all this stuff in gumbo. Now, do you throw all of the food in there and cook it all at once? Theresa, is that how we make gumbo? We just throw all of it in there and cook it all at once?
Well, that's how my husband does it. No,
Oh,
I shouldn't say that. He doesn't. My husband, like he has a method.
yeah, there's a method, right? You
He
don't
has
just
a
because
method.
if you throw
I
them,
put it in all at once.
Teresa, we have to work on your cooking. We're not going
I
to
know.
that gumbo.
I don't cook. I don't cook.
because we throw it there all at once. The rice, everything. Some certain pieces are going to be mushier than others. Not gonna have the same flavor
It
and
doesn't taste the
consistency.
same.
Yeah, it's not going to taste the same, right? And doing DEI work at companies is kind of like making gumbo. Like you need to know when you have to set the base to make the roux. You know when to put that pepper. If you put pepper in there, like when to put it in there because it has a certain consistency and spice. And to honor that pepper and everything that pepper can bring to the stew, you need to put it in at a certain time. The shrimp comes in at a certain time, so it's not overcooked, not too rubbery. Other green peppers that you don't want it to dissipate and be mushy. It's all about how you integrate people into the conversation to create brave spaces, and but allow each recipe in the dish to
Their
stand out by
flavor.
itself and
Yeah.
add to this connectivity of yumminess, right? And that's why connection is a superpower, but it's only when you create the right environment for the connection to really, m be well seasoned together and add that flavor and everybody can then just appreciate it for what it's worth.
Yeah. Everybody can have good gumbo then.
Yes, everybody can have good gumbo. Not the not
Not
too mushy
mushy.
gumbo, y'all. I'm not mushy boil all
Yeah,
the pot.
not mushy,
And
crappy, tasteless gumbo.
and we forgive her. We know she's not the cook, but she's good at cooking
Right.
other stuff. She cook up a good podcast
Yeah,
interview and some conversation.
not food, not food. No, but it's true, and people don't it's just like when people they set their core values and they're like, "Yeah, we believe in education. We believe in, family first." And
Mhm.
they're an accounting firm, and during tax season, they make their employees work 80 hours a week. You're
Mm,
not family first, you know?
yeah,
And I tell people, when you're building out your culture in your business, the first thing you have to start with is the environment,
mhm,
just like what you said. Because if the environment is toxic, it doesn't matter what you put in it,
yeah,
because what you put in it will become toxic.
mhm,
So it's like a dirty lake.
yeah,
If the lake is dirty, it's because of the environment. It's not
mm,
because of the lake itself, but everything that then goes in it becomes dirty.
mhm.
So, and I think, I like your analogy with the gumbo.
You can
I
steal
like
that.
that.
You can steal my gumbo
I
analogy.
know. I like that.
Like,
I like
you
that. It's
you
good.
know, you mentioned the lake because 'cause I've been using this other it's about systemic racism, and it's a primer, and I can't remember who does it. Imma have to send it to you much later, but I'm gonna try to remember most of it, and it talks about the fish, the lake, and the groundwater, right? Just to kinda explain people what systemic racism is,
Mm,
and if you're walking down in your neighborhood and you're walking down a lake and you see one fish floating belly up dead, right?
mm,
One would ask, "Oh, man, what's the matter? I wonder what happened to that fish," right? Now picture the fish as a student in the school system. One might ask, well, did the student study hard enough? Did it do these things? Why is this student failing? Right. But let's say if you keep walking down the lake and you see five more fish floating belly up the dead, floating belly up dead, then you would say, all right, what is wrong with this lake water? Now imagine that same thing happening to five lakes all across our nation. Now, one would might say is, okay, all of these lakes are affected. Now, we might think, okay, what's wrong with the groundwater? And what most people don't know that, you know, at least 80% of the water on this earth is groundwater. It's from
yeah.
underground. It's not
Mhm.
what you see above. And so if the going back to your analogy, if the contamination and all these fish are floating up, that means there's something in the groundwater, right?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
have to fix the root problem. Now, imagine like going back to the student example, all the same kids are affected in the school system, and it's usually the same kids over and over, right? In the school system, the welfare system, the jail system that are affected. W- We now look at using this analogy that often it's because there's something that's systemically happened here, and to get to the root problem, we need to look at the system. America, when we talk about the system in America, especially systemic racism, we have a systemic problem that needs fixing. And I don't think we do enough conversation to talk about systemically what do we have in place in these systems that are allowing the same outcomes. And sometimes people say, well, Terrell, the system is broken. The system isn't broken. The system was made that way.
Yeah.
The system is doing what the system is supposed to do.
Yeah. Because that's how it was created.
Mhm.
And that's why we have so many, we just have so many broken business models. We have so many broken, I mean, I talk a lot about, um, again, if you're an accountant and you're listening to this episode, I'm just going to put the caveat out there. But the way that accounting firms, I mean, they basically value people on your billable hours. But
Mm,
that's how accounting firms have been built, and you're exactly right. I mean, the systems, they're not broken. That's how they were built. And what we need to do is we need to look at the system and either create a new system, or we need to go in there and we need to clean the system up.
mhm. Yeah, and that's gonna be the hardest thing for us to do, but, I've been le and I think I told you this in our last conversation, I've been leading into some work that John Powell does with the Other and Belonging Institute, and there's this framework called targeted universalism that I'm about to educate the listeners on, and what targeted universalism does, it looks at how do we set universal goals, and you could do this in any system, set universal goals, right?
Mhm.
And then in those universal goals, how do we then look at how to get different groups of people where they're at in all those universal goals, right? So let's say, for example, if I'm gonna do this regionally worldwide in the US, let's say if we're comparing Montana and California, right? And where the goal is we want, you know, great air quality for all. Like all Americans need great air quality, and we test the air quality and wait, what places did I say again?
Montana and
Montana. Uh, uh,
New Jersey.
yeah. Let's just
Just
okay. We'll
pick
go
Jersey
Montana.
because
No, we'll
Jersey
pick
has
Jersey.
Jersey has crappy air quality. And if you're listening from New Jersey, I'm sorry.
We're sorry, Jersey.
But
So
you do. You have crappy air quality.
yeah, Montana and Jersey. Let's put those up against it, and then and let's say, and I don't know how they measure air quality, so I'm just making this up, people. But let's say Jersey has 30% air quality, and Montana has 70% air quality. We will make and then we measure this all across all the United States, right? And let's say, all right, Montana's has the highest out of everybody in the U.S. at 70, so we're going to make the air quality goal, the universal goal, 80%. Now, in order to get all of these states up to the air quality that we want at 80%, we have to look at each town to see what are each of these groups in this town going through that we need to put in place to get them to that 80%, right?
Mm,
And then we can even take that a step further. We can go by community in each town, and there'll be and to take that step further by group, right? Because sometimes some communities are separated by a group or the certain group of population that lives in this certain sector. And like, oh, what does this particular small town need to get to 80%? So then it increases the overall town goal and so forth, right? And this is how you set goals and implement into a system to kind of change the outcomes. And how do we
yeah.
start to look at that, right? So
Yeah.
if we as a country say all lives matter, not that I want to recoin that phrase, this is how we really put that to the test. If really all lives matter by setting universal goals so that everybody can succeed, everybody gets
Yeah.
good air, everybody gets education, everybody gets a good paying job. Let's set these universal goals and see how we get everybody to those universal goals.
It's funny. My business partner, my best friend, she passed away in 2021, but she was on the school board, and the district that she was in, that she was on the school board for, was affluent on one side and then low income, like kids whose parents were in prison or were drug addicts and lived with relatives, or so there was no in between.
Mhm,
And and it's funny because this was like back in when she started this initiative. I want to say it was back in 2010, I want to
mhm,
say, where she said, she was like, it's the same thing that you just talked about, the universal goal.
Yeah, universal goal.
To say, she said every every child needs education. Every child. Doesn't matter whether or not they can afford it or they can't, they deserve education, because education is what's going to change the school district, is what's going to change society, is what's going to change the world. So we need to make sure that everybody has the right to it.
Hmm.
And she fought until the day she died to make sure. Now there's a scholarship in her name, but she fought to make sure that every child had access to technology,
Hmm.
access to this, like a great education. And it was just so wild because she used to run into criticism
Hmm.
all the time. And it's mind-blowing. And it's something that it's why I do the work that I do and you're doing the work that you do, because we're the ones that are going to make that difference and
Hmm.
make sure that we set universal goals and we work towards them, because
Yeah.
ultimately that really is what's going to build the next generation and build a better world.
Hmm.
And it's why, I just don't understand why people can't see that. And I know it's because it's what everyone's used to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fear behind it. Like
Man,
a lot of fear.
there's so much fear of the unknown, but if we can get to that frontal cortex of our brain, I promise you people, we could do hard things well. It's just that some of us we get comfortable, and it's almost this is probably not the best analogy, but that person who's in a toxic relationship, but they keep going
Mm,
back to the toxic relationship because that's what's comfortable with them. And
mhm.
so the thought of being with somebody who's healthier and they don't know how to navigate that scares them. So they
It's a
go back
fear.
to the toxic relationship.
It's a fear. And, it's with some of the systems that we have in this country and everything. I mean, while people thought that they were working for so long, little did we know, and I think we're starting to see the effects of it, is that they were like things were eroding
Yeah.
everything, eroding, you know, freedoms, eroding, you know, positive things that happen, just
Mhm.
eroding it. And I think that's what we're dealing with now.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're dealing with now. And then, so that scared of the unknown, surprise, if you thought that the scared of the unknown of going into that healthy relationship was gonna be hard, wait till you get to this new level of fear unlocked, right?
Yeah.
And here's what I say about that. I think the reason the other reason why people, in the simplest terms, like the using my analogy of the person who's scared to get into that healthy relationship, the other fear is that the work that you have to do in yourself to be good enough for that, right? And which means there has to be some healing done. You have to confront those generational traumas that are very hard to do. You have to break them, right?
People don't want to.
And we have a deep, dark history in America that requires some collective healing and some reckoning around the traumas that our ancestors have done that has created what we're in today. And that's a hard discussion to have. And not
It
everybody's ready to have it.
No, and, you know, I work with CEOs and, leaders in businesses, and the majority of the people that I work with, they do not want to do the inner work. And the inner work and the healing and the being honest with yourself. Most people don't wanna do that, because that is way harder than building a business strategy or building, or figuring out how to even start a business. It's way harder to really ask yourself one simple question, which is, who am I?
Mhm.
And most people they don't wanna answer that. They don't wanna ask themselves that. They don't wanna do that inner work and that inner healing. So what do? They just keep over top of it, layering over top, whether it's labels, whatever, stigmatism, like whatever it is. S That's an I thing, I think, stigmatism, whatever. You got what I meant.
I get what you mean. I get what you
But
mean.
just layering it instead of dealing with it, and then what we do is we shed it.
Mhm.
We break that wall down so that real change and real growth can happen.
Yeah, and a
And I
lot of
think
that,
it starts individually.
yeah, it starts individually before you can get to the collective. Not means that doesn't mean you can't do both at once. We can both walk and chew gum, but in that individual work, it requires us to do some unlearning and do some learning, because
Mhm.
there's old things that, you know, our lizard brain and everything, our nervous system hangs on to for protection, that is hard to unlearn, that we don't need no more. And sometimes you may have needed that to get through a certain period of life, right? But
Mhm.
when you learn the new version of you, you need to learn how to unlearn some things that no longer suit you, right?
Yeah, and it
Uh,
takes work. It
yeah.
takes hard work. I mean, in 2023, I went out to go see a therapist, and I had something called EMDR done.
Mhm.
And EMDR is a form of therapy, and what it does is it helps you to figure out what that core belief is that you have that's been holding you back, that creates imposter syndrome, that creates fear, that creates, being prejudiced against something or,
Mhm.
whatever, and uncovering that whatever that belief is and then reprocessing it.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you I mean, mine surrounded, not feeling enough, not,
Mhm.
feeling like I wasn't enough or like my value, like really what my value is in this world. And it takes a lot of work,
Mhm.
a lot, and it brings up stuff and, but you really have to. It's like, Michael, who was it? Michelangelo when he was creating the angel or painting something in the chapel and just shedding everything that wasn't the angel, shedding everything that wasn't you
Mhm.
so that you could release all of that hurt and the trauma and the beliefs that you have that aren't right
Mhm.
so that you can truly like shine and do good. And it
Mhm.
takes a lot of work. And like I said, most people I don't think are willing to do that. So, which I kind of wanted to I could talk to you for hours, but I wanted to steer a little bit because I think this is what you do in your podcast, Rise
Yeah.
Urban Nation.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what your podcast is.
Yeah. So Rise Urban Nation, back when I was doing that workforce development work that I told you about, I used to go to the different schools and talk to young people about these different career pathways, and had money to do these different programs. And then what I noticed is that, a lot of our young people, well, let me not put this on just the young people, because adults have limiting beliefs too,
Mhm.
about what they can do, who they can be based on, the environment, circumstance, or whoever was in their head at the time, right? And sometimes I would hear, well, I don't see anybody that looks like me doing that. So that, and I was like, oh, I know a couple people. I'm not saying there's a whole bunch, but I know a couple people, like, and I realized that in today's society and modern media, that they weren't getting that representation shown of all these different people, like maybe who started a wellness business, accounting business, and all these different things of entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and so forth. So I wanted to create a platform to amplify the voices of Black and Pan African people all across the globe, to show all the amazing things that we're doing, and shine a light on some history and some amazing things that we've done in our past. Because I know many people who've created things in different companies, like maybe at Apple or Microsoft, where they had to either sign NDAs, or they've never been acknowledged for the thing that they created that made something in that
Mhm.
business successful, right?
Mhm.
And we would never know about these things because, sometimes we only get one version of history, right? And so trying to highlight these different, many amazing stories, but in the history that's being created now. Well, at that time, I didn't think I was creating history. As somebody told me as I was going forth and doing this, they's like, you realize you are creating you're writing and illustrating the Black history being made now. So this is going to be the Black history of the future. So all these kids can go back to these episodes and meet the people who created this company or that and so forth. And this is future Black history you're documenting, right? And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that. And so I guess I gotta keep going.
No, it's awesome. I mean, have you heard of Fawn Weaver?
Yes, of Uncle Nearest. That's my favorite whiskey, by the way.
Me too. I I have been obsessed. I have the book.
There.
And I mean, her work and writing the book really brought it to life.
Hmm.
Just rewriting the history of Nearest Green and Jack Daniels.
Yeah.
And that whole, I mean, just really because the company that bought Jack Daniels and the original article that they wrote about it completely whitewashed it and
Yeah.
completely whitewashed the whole story and made it like something that it wasn't. And really it was just so crazy. I don't even
Yeah.
know another
And
word.
until she unveiled the story,
Mhm.
this story
People didn't
wasn't
even know
told.
about
People didn't
him.
even know about it. And then Jack Daniels finally admitted that say that, yeah, Uncle Nearest taught Jack Daniels and a couple of prohibitionist folks how to make whiskey. And that's where
And he
our
was the
recipe.
one that really catapulted it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was the one that catapulted it. But prior to that, because she originally saw the article that was written previously
Mhm.
about, I mean, they talked about Nearest Green, but how they portrayed him was wrong. It was
Mhm.
inaccurate. And because of her, she rewrote history
Yeah.
in the present day,
Yeah.
which is amazing. So the work that you're doing on your podcast, that's exactly, you're rewriting history.
Yeah. And this is something that's all has been done over and over again throughout our history. And there's probably still so much history that we need to uncover. And that's why I always say, that there's a thing in America that we still haven't faced yet. And that's that this is part of that unfortunate ugliness of, of all of our ancestors, right? And
Yeah.
but I think there's if we were to lean into it and kind of educate ourselves, not from a point of shame, but from a point of just learning, unlearning, and awareness so we don't get back to that, right? We don't wanna
And
get
that's the
back
big
to that.
thing. That's the big thing is being aware of it, learning from it, unlearning, learning, learning a new way. And you can't do that if you don't have awareness.
Yeah,
And you can't hide from it. You can't ignore it. You can't you just have to go, as I always say, being somebody who battles with depression and anxiety, like the only way you're gonna face it and you're gonna get through it is you literally got to go right through it and you got to be honest with it. And I think, that's the same thing.
yeah,
And that once we do that, I mean, we're able to create change.
yeah, we are. And, like, I had a friend of mine who told me that they went on a trip to Germany, and
Oh,
they were surprised about how forward they are about and how they educate the real history of Nazi Germany and Hitler and all that. And they don't do it from a place and people embracing it and learn about it, and they don't do it from a place of shame, but a point just make to make sure that everybody understands and aware of how this came to be and to learn from it so they never go back to those days.
absolutely. My parents were just in Auschwitz, and my husband works for a German company, and he's told me this before. Kids are taught at a very young age. They have to go to Auschwitz. They have to go to the other concentration camps. They have to learn it. They have to learn about it. They have to, so it doesn't happen again.
Mhm.
And you're right. They face it like head on and not from a place of shame, but from a place of we're not going back. We're not going back. We're not going to repeat this
Yeah,
again.
because
And
we are better than this, and
we
we
are
don't wanna
better.
be this.
Yeah. No, exactly. Oh, my heavens. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I mean, I'm so glad I had you on this podcast, and I'm gonna bring you back on, and we're gonna continue to have the conversation. And you can continue to share your insights with us. And that is the beauty of celebrating what makes us different, because what
Mhm.
makes us different are portrayed flaws or are portrayed, our differences. That truly is where our strength lies
Yes,
and
it does.
where our greatness lies. And, when we learn how to celebrate that individually with each other and see each other as human, that's how we can make change happen.
Mm.
So thank you so much. I just have one quick question.
What's that?
What are you most grateful for?
Oh, man. I am most grateful for this weekend that I'm gonna spend with my daughter doing Easter stuff and birthday stuff. That's what I'm most
Mm,
grateful for.
awesome. Awesome. Well, I hope you have a wonderful weekend with her and, celebrating. And this is, this is a great weekend, with Easter coming. And, just by the way, I'm watching The Chosen. So I'm like getting all back into my understanding of everything.
Well,
But yeah, thank you. Thank you so very much for joining me. How can people, because I know people are going to be wanting to find you out there on the interweb. So how can
that
people find you?
you can find me whatever social media channel you follow, Taryells at whatever Instagram, Gmail. I'm not Gmail, Instagram, LinkedIn. See, I'm telling my age now. LinkedIn, you
MySpace. No, just kidding.
MySpace. Oh, wait, yeah, that's an old one. I'm not on MySpace, y'all. I'm not on my Facebook. Or if you want to check out the podcast, definitely check out the podcast. It's on wherever you listen to podcasts, Rise Urban Nation. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Hope you get to
Awesome.
tune in, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. And we will make sure that we link to all of those in the show notes so that someone who is listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube, that they can find you easily. So we will make sure that we link to that. So again, thank you so much. It has really been an honor to have you on the podcast and to be connected with you and, just have you as my friend, as my confidant, and, just like the world is such a better place, a much, much better place with you in it. So
Oh,
thank you
with you
again for
too, my
joining us.
friend. Pleasure.
Awesome. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your week. And remember, let's all take care of each other just a little bit more than we already do. Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value on this show, please follow the podcast so you never, ever miss an episode. And I would love, love, love if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for me. Even better, share the show with a fellow business owner ready to step fully into their CEO leadership role. Because right now, more than ever, the world really needs next level leaders. And by the way, did you know you can text me all your questions and get real-time feedback? You absolutely can. Just text the word CEO to me at 610-215-2838 to get connected. One last goodie for you before I go. If you're ready to scale your business and have a co-creator working right by your side, my C-Suite Mentor Program may be perfect for you and your possible new second in command. Just visit thecsuitementor.com to get started.